that. So this is the last class, Psalm 139 of this quarter. As we're looking into the survey of the Psalms, we want to know more about what the Psalms are like, what the psalmists were thinking when they were talking. And as I've mentioned before, I believe there are just so many universal truths to just reading any of these Psalms. So we'll read Psalm 139. And how we'll do it this evening is I'll just kind of go through the sections here for us, because Psalm 139 is broken up into 4 different sections, as you can see on screen. God's unerring knowledge of man's thoughts. So God knows what we're thinking, the way that we think, and how our thoughts affect our actions. So I'll bring that into a point here in just a second. Man's inability to hide from God's presence. So think of someone like an ostrich. When an ostrich, at least it's a joke. I don't know if they actually do it or not, but in cartoons, an ostrich would get scared or something. It'd just dig its head in the ground and act like nothing's going on. And of course it's funny because all of its body is visible. It's just that its head is in the ground, and that's like man. We may try, but we are unable to hide from God's presence. He is omnipresent. He is omniscient. He knows everything that goes on. So that's part of that. The third section, all-knowing and all-present God in our creation. These are popular texts, well-known texts to people who are Christians. People who are not Christians have probably gotten a good idea of what I'm about to talk about in that section. And finally, response to God's all-knowing desire for holiness. God is all-knowing, and he desires us to be holy because he is holy. And that's a quote, from a verse in the New Testament, 1 Peter. Be holy, for God is holy. And we'll talk about that as we get there. So first off, let's look at God's unerring knowledge for man's thoughts. If you have your material, of course, that material is written in a different translation. What's recorded there, I think, is the New American Standard, I believe. I want to be reading this one here, this particular chapter in the New King James. So it might be a little bit different if you're looking at your material. So we'll be looking at verses 1 through 6 right now. It says, so you can see the question on screen. There's a question that prompts as we're about to read this. Does God know our thoughts? Does he really know our thoughts? If so, let's go ahead and read so we can get a good answer. All right, verse 1. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. Verse 2. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You have hedged me before and hedged behind me, and you laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. So the psalmist comes to the realization, so the question on screen, does God know what we're thinking? Does he know our thoughts? And of course he does. The psalmist comes to that realization. He admits it. He confesses it. God, you know pretty much just anything about me. You know where my house is. You know where I lay my head down, where I go to bed, where I go to work. There's this bubble around me where you are all around me. Now, I will say this, is you read in verse 5 says, you have hedged me behind and before, you laid your hand upon me. This is not just talking about God, you know about me, but this idea of a hedge, or you've hedged, you've made these boundaries for me. A lot of times in other parts of Scripture that's kind of used in a good light. Sometimes that God has hedged around you. Talking about Job, God, that's how Satan accused God. He said, you've kind of hedged Job. You've given him a comfortable life, and you've set the boundaries for him, and that's why he's so obedient to you. So the psalmist here, obviously, he believes to have a good relationship with God, and he mentions all of these things. You understand my thoughts afar off. You comprehend my path. Here it is, verse 4. Pay attention to this one. There is not a word on my tongue, but behold, Lord, you know it all together. So before he speaks, or as he's speaking, God knows what he's saying. So these are very exaggerated ways of just saying that God is all-knowing. He knows us, what we're thinking, and what we're doing through and through. So how important is this to us, as Christians? Because the psalmist is writing this, but now as 21st Christians, what does this mean? That means just in anything I'm doing, I need to know that God is involved. Anything at all. my job, my work, staying at home, being in the worship service. God knows my true intent. He knows what I'm doing. One of my favorite examples of this is shown in Jesus Christ. In John chapter 3, you don't have to turn there, but I'm just going to give you a quick synopsis of what happens in John 3. Nicodemus, who's this Jewish teacher, he goes to Jesus at night because he's kind of scared, and that gives you a little good indication of what's going on. He's scared of what other Jews might think. He goes to Jesus at night, and he asks him a question, and Jesus responds in a way that doesn't really make sense. Like, he doesn't really acknowledge the question. Instead, he jumps right into almost a lesson. And as you see, Nicodemus responds accordingly. He continues that conversation with what Jesus basically started with. My point there was that Nicodemus might have wanted to start a conversation a certain way, but Jesus knew his true intent. He said, I know what you're thinking. I know your heart. Let's talk about what you really want to talk about. And so I think this is, one of the ways that it's really illustrated to me how God and how Jesus, the divine, know us through and through. And so as I go to God, knowing that he's always around. So there's that fear, right? That God knows what I'm doing. He knows what I'm thinking. But I should also be aware that if God knows what I think and what I do, then I should not have any problem going to him and talking with him, right? He knows already. If it's my fault, I should be able to go with him to a fault. If it's my insecurity or a doubt, I should be able to say, God, look, I'm not strong enough, and I know you know that. So can we please talk about it? Can I please talk about it with you? Can I inquire of you? Can I request of you? Can I humble myself and say that, look, I don't have it all together, but you know that you do, and that you know that I know you do. And so this is just a really good eye-opening, refreshing idea. I say eye-opening, maybe not to us necessarily, but to a lot of the people of the world. This is who God is. But for us, it's a refreshing, it's a refreshing thought to think, okay, look, I don't have to do it alone because he knows. If it's my sin, I can bring it up because he already knows. And as I mentioned, my thoughts or insecurities, he already knows those. So that's how the psalmist starts this. So let's continue on. The next thing that he mentions is man's inability to hide from God's presence. And there you see there, an image of a man who's trying to hide from something, I guess, and sticks his face in the ground just like the ostrich would. So begin reading verse 7 through 12. Where can I go from your spirit? So that's the next logical step, right? God, if you know everything and you're everywhere, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell or Sheol, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall follow me, even the night shall be light about me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness as the light are both like to you. So the next logical step is, as I mentioned, God, if you know everything, you're everywhere. So where can I hide from you? Well, I can't. And I guess the reason I'm kind of just talking at this point is because these are pretty easy verses to understand. But sometimes we act like we don't know these. If I'm a Christian and I act like God's not anywhere, well, he won't know if I do this, or he won't know if I don't do this. A lot of times when we talk about, make sure what God, God's watching you. Don't do this. Don't do that. We say these as don'ts. I can't sin, or I can't do this. A lot of times a Christian falls or makes a fault by failing to do something they should have done. Done something good. Either explain the gospel to someone, or reach out to a brother or sister who's in need, or any sort of those things, and making a real attempt for an act of service for somebody. A lot of times those are things that we should do, and we act like God's not watching us. No one's going to know if I didn't do that or if I did do that. So but the psalmist here makes a really good point. God's going to know where we are and what we're doing, so I can't hide from him. What I liked about, if you were from a member of the Hueytown Church of Christ and you were listening to the service last night, Colby gave an invitation. I thought he did a really good job. And one of the things he mentioned in there is he was talking about Habakkuk. Um, and he was also talking about, the year 2020 and how bad it's gone. One of the things he mentioned is like, we cannot put our heads in the ground, like an ostrich would or something like that, and just pretend that bad things aren't happening. That it's silly to think that we can hide from those things. It's silly to think that nothing can happen in those times, but God knows about those. So I guess the kind of the connection I'm trying to make is God doesn't only know about you, but he also knows what's going on around you. A lot of times we think that God doesn't know and he isn't in charge, when obviously this would all imply the necessary inference, although it doesn't say it, is that God is in charge of everything. He knows what's going on. It's not just the politicians. It's not just the health organizations, this and that. It's God knows what's going on in the world. And so these are the necessary logical steps that we have to take. And okay, if God knows me so well, where can I hide from? I can't hide from it. And that means nobody can. And he knows what's going on because he is all knowing. So continue moving on. Verse 13, as we're looking at and knowing God and how he is present in our creation. If you look at that image on screen, it's kind of a weird image, and I'll admit that. But it's somebody's hands, and you can see at the bottom half of that creature there, it's almost like a man is being formed out of like a piece of clay, and so like a ball of clay. So let's talk about that. Verse 13, going on to verse 18. By the way, these are the verses that I mentioned earlier that are pretty well known to people who are not Christians. And amongst people who claim to be Christians, these are very popular verses. A lot of times you'll see these written in calligraphy and then used as house decorations. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I think that could be good. But these are popular verses. Verse 13. For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows them very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed, and in your book they were all written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet were none of them. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How great is the sum of them. If I should count them, they would be more than the number in the sand, more than the number in the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. So the writer here is talking about, before he even existed, before he came into fruition. So he's in the earlier verses, the first part, he mentioned how God knew him. As a person, he knows his thoughts. So basically this realm of existence, God knows about that. But then he kind of backtracks and he says, before I was really even born, you're the one who brought me into life. So these are really, really beautiful verses. I can't imagine, because I'm not a parent, but if you're a parent, how much you look forward to your child being born. Maybe before you had a child, you thought about the names you would give them. You thought about what kind of kid they would be. Would they be quiet? Would they be loud and obnoxious? Would they be troublesome? Would they be really respectful? Would they be kind of mischievous? Would they like to play games? Would they like to laugh? Or were they more quiet and reserved? All those things that go through a parent's mind before they have a child, and they consider what kind of kid they'll be. And in the process that they're imagining and they're fantasizing, daydreaming about what kind of child that they're going to have, they grow to love them more and more just by having these thoughts and ideas in their head. They build a bond with their child before it's even born. And the reason these verses are just so beautiful is because God, that's exactly what's going on here. Before you and I were born, he knew who we were. He created us. He, as you see in the picture below, he molded us into the way that we were. If you read what it says in verse 13, it says, You formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. Drop down to verse 15. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. So that's not talking about hell. That means that, it's as if nobody knew what was going on, and God, almost in the bottom of the earth where nobody knows what's going on there, made me, but he knew. And so I guess why these are so beautiful is because, we can equivalent it to how, a parent would feel towards their child. But as a Christian, I want to make this other point too. It means so much to me because I'm claiming to be Christ-like. I'm claiming not to only be a creation, but also the Son of God, a son of God, not the Son of God, but excuse me, a son of God or a daughter of God. And it falls on me now to have this immense appreciation for these verses, for the truth, that are in these verses. If I'd like you to turn your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 2, it's one of my favorite verses talking about this idea. Ephesians chapter 2. Sorry, my phone's going off. Well, I thought I had the verse. I had the verse written down. Now I don't see it. I must have put it on another piece of paper. Well, I'm so sorry. I had the verse written down right here when I was looking at it, and now I might have taken it into the other room without even realizing it. Okay. Yes, it is Ephesians chapter 2. I'm so sorry about that. Try to stay on track, talking about how God created us, and how I need to be even more appreciative as a Christian because I claim to be not only a creation, but also a son of his or a daughter of his. So I have this immense appreciation for it. I want to read these verses that go along with those thoughts. Look at what it says in verse 8 through 10 of Ephesians 2. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and not of yourselves, for it is a gift of God. Not of works, lest anyone should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So the idea in verse 10 that we are his workmanship or his handiwork created beforehand, that goes back to the idea of what the psalmist is saying. I was created before anyone knew me. God had this plan for what he wanted his creation to be. He wanted his creation to be sons and daughters of his. And now through the grace of God, I can be. Through the grace and also Christ, I can be that son. But what I also like about it is that it's talking about me being his handiwork or his workmanship. I'm a design that he made. And as the design that God made, I'm now also required to carry on the job that whatever he designed me to do, this handiwork or this workmanship. I'm like a tool, and I'm going to try to be what he wanted me to be from before I even existed. And so now as a Christian, I have this new thought behind it. I'm going to be what he wants me to be because he loved me before I was even me, And so I know that's a lot of back and forth, but those verses really, really speak to me personally. And I think about the appreciation I need to have for God for having that kind of care and love for me. We love forethought, don't we, in our relationships? The best way to woo a young lady is to surprise her with something, surprise her with flowers, surprise her with maybe we're going out on a date, and maybe we said we're going to do this, and you do that thing, but you also add a little something extra. You go out for ice cream. I don't know. You make something interesting to surprise, because that implies that the young man had forethought. He was thinking about it beforehand. He wanted to make this surprise. For God, it wasn't a surprise. The mystery was revealed to us, and we see his forethought in that. So it makes us appreciate him even more. All right, as we move on, turn your Bibles back to Psalm chapter 139. Psalm chapter 139. And so we're going to jump in here to the last portion here. Response to, God being holy. Now, if I were in a Bible class setting, you saw that image on screen, I would ask you, what does that look like to you if you could think about a Bible story? And I believe it's from a company called the Bible Project. I believe it's where I got this image from. Or at least it's associated with them. It's a knockoff image from that company. Basically, this is this company that tries to retell the Bible in animation. And honestly, I think it's a good endeavor. Anyways, this is a still from their work. And I believe that's from the story, the account of Moses going to the burning bush, and how, everything around him was holy. It was just, if it wasn't that, this may be a still from when Moses was allowed to see a portion of God, and almost couldn't handle it, became blinded. So I'm not exactly sure. That's just a side note. It's a very good project. If you have a chance to go on the internet, look up the Bible Project. It tells the Bible stories in animation. Okay. All right, verses 19 through 24. All right. It says, "Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God," is what the psalmist says. "Depart from me, therefore, you bloodthirsty men, for they speak against you wickedly. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate them, O Lord, who hate you? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know in my heart. Try me and know my anxieties. You see if there are any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." Okay, so now this kind of takes a turn. As I mentioned, I think that we need to have a type of appreciation for God for knowing us, for creating us, having that intentional love towards us. Now, that's what I believe that we should have. But even though the psalmist says it, I believe that's how he feels. And the reason I think that is because when he begins to talk about wicked men, if I have an appreciation for God, that means I'm going to abhor wickedness, because God isn't wicked. In fact, he's holy. He's the exact opposite of that. So the psalmist here says, do I not abhor wicked men and what they do? And then he begins to talk, and he says this thing in verse 23, but also in verse 1. He uses the word search. Search me. Look at me through and through. If there's anything in me, change it, Lord, and lead me in the way everlasting. I need to have that kind of attitude of letting God in. God knows everything. We've already established that. He's everywhere. But there's also an attitude I need to take of, Lord, come in and search me. Help me to understand where I've gone wrong and lead me in the right way. I equivalent this, to, somebody knocking on your door, asking to come in. Could they go through the window, if they really wanted to? If you weren't there, could they knock down the door? Could they pick the lock? Instead, they come to the door while you're there, and the expectation is that you open the door. You're allowing them to come in. God could come in if he wanted to. He could leave us all, like robots. But this is now the psalmist saying, search me, allowing him to come in. And that's an open relationship for him and God, opening the relationship for him and God. But also the reason for it is because he realizes, God, you're holy, and there is wickedness in the world. Make sure I don't have any of that. So going to the wickedness part, it says in verse 20, For they speak against you wickedly, your enemies take your name in vain. That was a big issue with God, taking his name in vain. That is such common knowledge nowadays, that people speak in that way, using euphemisms like that. And it is so sad. People don't know what they're saying. And the psalmist here is angry with that. If you go back to verse 19, it said, oh, that you would slay the people that do something like that. And he says, that's pretty extreme, but it's also perfect hatred. Look what it says in verse 22. I hate them with perfect hatred. He doesn't hate them in the sense that he is jealous of them, that they've done something to him, and now he has some sort of enmity or animosity towards them. You've done something to me, now I want to get you back. I hate you. That's not the idea there. It's that here is what is good, here is what is right, what is just, and that is God. And they're taking it and they're destroying it, they're perverting it, they're being wicked. And so you hate those actions. This is good, you love that. This is bad, wicked, you hate that. So that's the perfect hatred that the psalmist is talking about there. And he's asking God to help him understand that and also bring it in himself. And that is where we already talked about this idea of search me, O God, and change me. Teach me to go on the path everlasting. So it's a very beautiful psalm, Psalm 139. And I know we didn't go to a lot of other verses. It was just kind of this overview. Sometimes it's good to talk about it, and that's kind of more of what I did. And you know me, if you don't know me and my lessons, I use a lot of verses. But sometimes it's good just to read the verses and talk about it. And this isn't me just going off my thoughts and opinions. I did study for this. If you go to your material, there's a lot of good information there, and everything that we've said, I've said, aligns with those things. So consider them. If you have any questions or comments, you need to be more like the psalmist. Try to allow God into your life and change you, search you as he does with intention, because he already knows everything. And the psalmist brings us out beautifully in this poem, and hopefully it helps us to come to a better understanding of God. All right, thank you for your fine attention. Like I said, I'm not exactly sure what we'll be talking about in the future weeks, Lord willing, but it'll probably be the Psalms, but I might try to incorporate some other things in there. All right, thank you for your fine attention. Lord willing, if you go to Hueytown, I will see you on Sunday. Bye, guys.